We've done a lot of shit on these trips. We've blown a lot of stuff up. I've ran a lot of different equipment. I don't think anything compares to this.
Parker Schnabel just bought an ancient gold mine in Bolivia, a move so risky that it's almost unbelievable. With unreliable vehicles, half-baked plans, and a local miner's vague guidance, he dove deep into the untouched wilderness of Puyo Puyo, risking everything for a chance to strike gold. The crew faced endless setbacks, treacherous roads, relentless mud, and the unforgiving altitude. Yet Parker wouldn't back down. Let us tune in and see whether Bolivia's treacherous mountains will reveal their golden secrets or bury Parker's dreams for good. Bolivia's forgotten gold rush. The crew was lucky enough to have a local guy, Diego, who had their backs and got them set up with a new vehicle. Because why plan ahead when you can improvise? Now in Bolivia, they could continue with their oh-so-carefully crafted plan, read Winging It, diving deeper into this mysterious land, searching for the next pot of gold. And let's be honest, nobody knew what they'd find, and that was probably the point. Then Diego mentioned something that changed everything. But what was it? You'll have to wait to find out. They had already found a bit of gold in La Rinconada, Peru, a place known for its cold, altitude, and general unpleasantness. Now they were heading even further south, across some endless stretch called the Altiplano Plateau, into a tiny spot on the map called Puyo Puyo. Puyo Puyo is the kind of place that feels like it's in the middle of nowhere, because it is. Parker had heard it was rich in gold, so naturally he just had to give it a shot. Now in Puyo Puyo, the crew had one mission: talk to the locals, dig around, and figure out if there was actually any gold worth digging for. It wasn't exactly the most sophisticated strategy, more like something you'd see in a movie about clueless treasure hunters. But they were all in. They were there to prospect, talk to local miners, and see if they could stumble upon the next big thing. Of course, when they arrived, things were about as chaotic as you'd expect. They ran into some guy mining the rivers near town who gave them some vague info about gold, talk about secrets of the universe. But really, Parker wasn't leaving without at least giving it a try. It was a classic, maybe there's gold here, maybe there isn't, but we're already here, so we might as well get muddy scenario. Fast forward to the panning, and it wasn't looking good. Mud everywhere, nothing but disappointment in the pan. Classic mining letdown. Still, Parker didn't quit. He'd heard about some other lady in town who might be able to help, and sure enough, he found a miner who showed them a real nugget. Finally, a bit of success, a glimmer of something shiny in a sea of brown dirt. The miner led them to the so-called Golden Eagle area across the river. Apparently, this was the place to be. This was what they needed, a shot at the big time. Who knows if it was actually worth anything, but at least they had something to chase after. It's been quite the journey from Alaska's Big Nugget mine, where Parker got his start under his granddad's wing, to this Bolivian adventure. He's gone from a teenager learning the ropes in the Alaskan wilderness to a guy who's led his crew through some of the harshest places on Earth, like the Yukon, Guyana, and now Bolivia. It's always the same story. Hardships, breakdowns, frustration, but he just keeps going, kind of addicted to the struggle. The journey through Bolivia wasn't just a simple sightseeing tour with some prospecting thrown in. This was the type of environment that seemed to actively work against them at every turn. The roads were barely roads, more like suggestions drawn in the dirt. The high altitude made every step feel like a workout. And let's not forget the constant logistical nightmare of trying to keep equipment running when you're miles from civilization. If something broke, there was no running to the nearest repair shop. They had to figure it out on the spot, often with limited supplies and a lot of ingenuity. Parker and his team weren't strangers to tough conditions, but Bolivia really put them to the test. There were moments when it felt like they might have to turn back. Days went by with nothing but setbacks, broken down vehicles, washed out roads, and the nagging uncertainty that maybe this whole adventure was just one big misstep. But Parker is relentless. He's not the kind of guy who throws in the towel just because things get hard. If anything, he seems to thrive on it. One of the biggest challenges they faced was just navigating the terrain. The Altiplano Plateau isn't exactly friendly to travelers. It's a vast, desolate stretch of land that seems to go on forever, with nothing but the wind and the occasional herd of llamas to keep you company. The isolation was intense. Puyo Puyo, when they finally reached it, felt like a small speck of humanity in an otherwise empty world. It was the kind of place that made you wonder how anyone managed to live there at all. But the people of Puyo Puyo were tough, no doubt about it. They had to be to survive in such a harsh environment. Parker and his crew made it their mission to get to know the locals, figuring that the best way to find gold was to learn from those who had been working the land for generations. It wasn't long before they started hearing the stories, tales of rich veins hidden deep in the hills, of gold that had eluded countless miners before them. It was exactly the kind of challenge Parker couldn't resist. One of the most interesting characters they met was an old miner who had been panning the rivers around Puyo Puyo for decades. He was a quiet guy, not too eager to share his secrets. But Parker managed to get him talking. The old man spoke of a time when the area was bustling with prospectors, all hoping to strike it rich. Most of them left empty-handed, but a few found enough to keep them going. He showed Parker a small nugget he had found, a tiny piece of gold that glimmered in the sunlight. It wasn't much, but it was enough to prove that there was still gold to be found. Parker and his team felt something shift as they prepared to head to the river. A treasure beyond reach. Parker decided to follow the old man's lead, heading to the river to try his luck. It was slow going. The water was cold, and the mud seemed determined to swallow their pans whole. Hours went by with little to show for their efforts. It was frustrating, to say the least. But then, just when it seemed like they might be wasting their time, one of the crew members let out a shout. There, in the bottom of his pan, was a tiny flake of gold. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep them going. From there, the crew decided to push deeper into the hills. The Golden Eagle area that the old miner had mentioned was their next target. It was a tough climb, the kind that left them gasping for breath and questioning their sanity. The trail was barely visible, winding its way through rocky outcrops and steep inclines. But they pressed on, driven by the hope that maybe, just maybe, they were on the verge of something big. When they finally reached the Golden Eagle site, it was clear they weren't the first to try their luck there. The area was littered with remnants of old mining attempts, holes dug into the hillside, rusted tools abandoned long ago. It was a stark reminder that gold mining is never a sure thing. For every success story, there are countless failures. People who poured their blood, sweat, and tears into the earth and came away with nothing. He and his crew set up camp, ready to spend as long as it took to see if anything was left to be found. They worked from dawn until dusk, digging, panning, and searching for any sign that there was still gold in those hills. It was exhausting work. The sun was relentless, beating down on them as they toiled, and the nights were cold, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes it hard to sleep. It wasn't a huge vein, nothing that was going to make them millionaires overnight, but it was enough. Enough to prove there was still gold in those hills, enough to make all the hard work and setbacks feel worth it. The crew let out a collective cheer, the kind of pure, unfiltered joy that comes from knowing that all your effort has finally paid off. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. With spirits lifted, they decided to keep going. They knew they weren't going to strike it rich in Bolivia, but that wasn't really the point. The point was the adventure, the challenge, the chance to do something few people ever get to do. It was about pushing themselves to their limits, seeing what they were capable of. In that sense, Bolivia had been a success. They packed up their camp, loaded their gear into the battered vehicle Diego had found, and started the long journey back to civilization. The road was just as rough as it had been on the way in, but this time, a sense of accomplishment made every bump and jolt a little easier to bear. They had come to Bolivia with nothing but a vague idea of where to look, and hoped that they might find something worth finding. And they had done just that. For Parker, the experience was another chapter in his journey as a gold miner. He had learned a lot in Bolivia, about the land, about the people, and about himself. It wasn't always easy, and there were plenty of moments when he wondered if it was worth it. But in the end, it always was. Because it's not just about the gold. It's about the adventure, the thrill of the hunt, the chance to do something extraordinary. As they drove away from Puyo Puyo, he couldn't help but look back at the hills they had just left behind. Somewhere out there, more golden secrets were waiting to be uncovered. Maybe one day he'd come back to find them, But for now, it was time to move on to the next challenge, the next adventure. Because that's what it's all about. Never stopping, never settling, always looking for the next big thing. Bolivia, for those keeping track, isn't exactly the easiest place to stroll in and start picking up gold nuggets. It's rough terrain, thick with red tape, local miners with their own methods, and, oh yeah, a totally different language. But none of that seemed to faze him. Armed with endless ambition and a dose of naivety, he set off into uncharted territory to chase the almighty dollar. It's like someone told him there was still a treasure map out there, and he just couldn't resist the idea of being the one to follow it, no matter how many roadblocks came up along the way. Now, don't get the idea that everything went smoothly in Bolivia. In fact, things went just about as wrong as they could. Equipment failures, insane weather, and prospecting sites that turned out to be absolute duds. There's nothing quite like heading into the jungle only to find, well, a whole lot of nothing. Even the best sites they scouted were disappointments, forcing a rethink of the whole plan. It's almost like the universe was giving a reality check. Sometimes gold mining just doesn't cooperate, yet he kept plowing ahead, believing that the next dig would be the one that hit it big. Most of them weren't. Bolivia wasn't even the end of it. The entire South American expedition also dragged him into Peru. If Bolivia was a disaster, Peru was a nightmare. Flooding, medical emergencies, every problem you could imagine, they faced it. One thing after another, the South American dream turned into a grind fest of obstacle after obstacle. The crew must have been questioning their life choices at this point. Hey, remember when we used to just dig holes in the Yukon? That was way easier. But there's something to be said for his relentlessness. Even when everything around him screamed, "Give up," he was still determined to strike gold somewhere, somehow. Bolivia pushed them hard, but Parker couldn't resist the call of what lay ahead. Testing the limits. Reflecting on Bolivia, it's pretty clear he bit off more than he could chew. The place was never going to be easy, and he found that out the hard way. The setbacks were constant reminders that, even for a supposed gold mining prodigy, there's no guarantee of success. The gold game isn't just about digging in the right spot. Sometimes it's about luck, sometimes it's about sheer stubbornness, and other times it's just plain not in the cards. But he would never admit that. To him, each setback is just part of the journey. A twisted rite of passage that makes it all worth it. If you're determined enough, you can convince yourself there's meaning in every failure. With the South American adventure behind him, for now, anyway, he was looking to the next horizon. It's like he couldn't help himself. After every setback, every unsuccessful venture, there's always this underlying belief that the next one will be different, that the next plot of land will be the one with untapped reserves just waiting for him to strike it rich. Honestly, it's hard to tell whether he's just overly optimistic or genuinely believes he's invincible. Either way, he's not slowing down. There's always another plot of dirt, another stretch of jungle, another mountain to mine. Whether it's actually worth it or just another chapter in his endless gold-chasing saga, only time will tell. Parker Schnabel's Bolivian adventure reads like a classic tale of ambition running up against reality. He's not afraid to spend the money, work with whoever he can, and dive headfirst into risky territory. But as much as he wants to believe that every adventure will end in a golden payday, sometimes it's just about barely scraping by. He may call it growth, but to an outsider, it looks a lot like spinning his wheels in the mud, hoping that someday, somewhere, it'll all pay off. Whether that's brilliant or just plain stubborn, that's up for debate. Parker's journey into Bolivia started with a simple idea: expand his reach, find new opportunities, and make a name for himself outside of the well-trodden mining paths of North America. The dream was big: untouched gold reserves deep in the heart of South America. The reality, however, was far less glamorous. Bolivia is no stranger to mining. The country has a long, complex history with gold, silver, and tin extraction. Parker knew he was stepping into a world where people have been at this for generations, and yet he still believed he could bring something new to the table. He didn't come in quietly either. With cameras in tow, Parker's adventure in Bolivia was set up to be a spectacle, something that would make good TV while also serving his relentless drive for expansion. The terrain was unforgiving from the start. The Bolivian landscape, with its dense forests, steep hills, and unpredictable weather, was nothing like the familiar grounds of the Yukon. Logistics became a nightmare almost immediately. Moving heavy equipment through narrow dirt roads that turned into mudslides after rainstorms was more than just a challenge. It was a constant test of patience. Parker's crew spent as much time figuring out how to get their gear from point A to point B as they did actually mining. The equipment failures came fast and often. Hydraulic systems broke down, generators refused to work, and more than once they found themselves stranded with nothing to do but wait for repairs. Every day brought a new issue, and with each setback, Parker's frustration grew. It became increasingly clear that he was far out of his comfort zone. The local miners in Bolivia were used to doing things their own way, and Parker's arrival didn't exactly change that. Parker tried to introduce some new techniques, methods he'd used back in Alaska that had yielded good results. But what works in the icy streams of North America doesn't necessarily translate well to the humid, mineral-rich soil of South America. The Bolivian miners had their own way of doing things, and they weren't always thrilled with the idea of some outsider coming in and telling them they were doing it wrong. Parker found himself having to navigate not only the physical challenges of mining, but also the delicate balance of working alongside people who had been doing this their entire lives. It wasn't about showing them up, it was about earning their respect. But respect doesn't come easy when you're the newcomer with a camera crew and an agenda. Did Parker underestimate the challenges of Bolivia, or were his methods just not suited for the local terrain? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe.